Welcome back to another painting video. I felt like painting something simple and in a looser art style. And whenever that's the case, I go back to portraits and watercolor paper. This one is by the brand Khadi. It's 100% cotton, very thick and absorbent, and has these beautiful paper edges, as it's handmade from recycled cotton rags. The paper edges is why I avoided taping the paper down more tightly. I didn't want them to tear off, after all. While I'm using acrylics for this portrait, the technique is more inspired by watercolors and gouache, but I love the final touches and layering I can create with acrylics specifically. First, I did a quick sketch in colored pencil. I have to admit that this sketch wasn't great, and I should have focused more on getting the unique facial features correct. But I wanted to paint this to relax and loosen up after several days of very precise painting on client commissions, so I went more with feeling rather than logic. The pencil I'm using here is my favorite for sketching. A Derwent drawing pencil in the shade 64 Terracotta. These pencils are very soft, and all the earth shades especially look so beautiful for portraits. They're also water soluble, so the plan was to go in with water over this sketch and use the pencil pigment as a base for the painting. The colored pencil sketch done, I used a little bit of Payne's Gray acrylic paint, diluted with a lot of water, and went over the lines to start blending and capturing the shadows. Payne's Gray is a really fun color to paint with. The pigments mixed for it are ultramarine blue and carbon black, so it's this very cool shade, and you can see how it mixes with that terracotta colored pencil to create more neutral hues. If you recognize the character, hi, I'm glad you could tear yourself away from the game to watch this painting video instead. If you didn't recognize her, this is Shadowheart, a character from the recently released game Baldur's Gate 3. It's based on the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop game, and the character designs are just amazing. Quintessential fantasy, and I really wanted to use this character in particular for some portrait practice. I also sketched 2 other companion characters, and I'm very tempted to draw more of them. I've been meaning to practice portraits more, especially in color, as most of my practice so far has been focused on line drawings. Let me know if you'd like me to draw a particular character, and in what painting medium. I'm using just a few colors for most of this portrait. The Payne's Gray, the terracotta of the pencil, and burnt sienna, which is a close match for the colored pencil's hue and worked great for layering and deepening those colors. And of course titanium white for mixing. You can see here that I have 2 tubes of titanium white. One is by the brand Golden, which is my favorite for acrylic paints. Especially their heavy body paints just work really well for my painting style. This titanium white is very pigmented, opaque, and the paint consistency is quite thick, so it can overpower the other colors in a mix quite easily. Whenever I need a more transparent, less intense mixing white, I use the Shinhan titanium white. It's less pigmented and easier to adjust a color mix with. It's also really cheap and probably the paint tube I use the most overall in all my art. You can imagine it as an in-between of titanium white and zinc white in more high-end acrylic brands, but for a fraction of the price. To keep the watercolor style alive in this acrylic painting, I left parts of the portrait very rough and the brush strokes simple and natural, especially for the hair at the back and around her neck. You might be wondering why I use acrylic paints on a watercolor paper. Why not just watercolor paints? Watercolors are actually the color medium I've used the longest, ever since I was a teenager drawing manga comics and reached for them when doing cover illustrations or the occasional color page. I love the soft color transitions and blending and the textures they can create. But I do often struggle with building up layers in watercolors and getting deep contrast and precision. They can be a bit unforgiving as a medium when making mistakes, too. With acrylics or gouache, I can paint over areas I don't like, while watercolors only work from light to dark. That's probably something I should practice in the future, but here I wanted to see how far I could dilute the acrylic paints to work like watercolors, while still giving me that option of painting the final layer with opaque paints. Another bonus of using acrylics, or if you don't use acrylics, gouache or acrylic gouache would function similarly, is that I don't need much water. As I didn't stretch and tape this paper, so as to preserve the unique edges, I couldn't use a lot of water to dilute my paints, and multiple layers of watercolors would have warped the paper quite a bit. Instead, after the first color layer was finished, I mostly applied just pure paint mixed with just enough water to give it a bit of a jelly gouache consistency. In my experience, acrylics are a bit more opaque than gouache, and it really allows me to repaint and layer a lot, which is something I enjoy. I get to just take a painting one step at a time, without worrying about getting everything right on the first try. Of course, I didn't actually get this one correct at all, if you can use that word in the context of art and painting. Her mouth ended up a bit too low, and I think the nose is too prominent in how I painted it. I'd wanted to make this overall a more ethereal painting, but I do like the expression of the eyes a lot and enjoy the heavy makeup, the freckles and skin texture, and the scar. Like I mentioned earlier, I'd love to draw and paint more of the characters, or maybe even Shadowheart again, in a more realistic style, or maybe even oil pastels. While acrylics are my main painting medium and what I want to work on the most consistently, I believe I can always learn a lot from trying out different art styles, painting materials, and even surfaces, like this watercolor paper here. Acrylics on watercolor paper feel completely different from acrylics on panel or on canvas, for example. What do you think? Should I make a little portrait series out of this? I think it would be a great opportunity to practice a variety of elements and then look back at this first portrait to compare. If you're not into the game, I hope this was still interesting to see from an acrylic painting point of view and on how to combine watercolor pencils with another medium. The original painting is also on my shop. I think the paper edges really elevate this simple sketch, and I'd be happy if it found a new home. Thank you so much for watching, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, and hope to see you again soon in my next painting video.